Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we'll have a look at a very interesting new microphone from Shure called the Nexadyne 5. Full disclosure, I was sent this microphone and I will get to keep it when this is done, but of course all the opinions in this video are entirely my own. So first of all, unboxing. Shout out to Saskia Etoman, by the way, for sending this. Get rid of this big box. Here it is. Tiny box, but hopefully big sound. We got a little bag. Always helps. Oh, here it is, Nexadyne 5. The Nexadyne 5 is a microphone designed for recording guitar amps and cabinets, as we will see shortly, and that is a very interesting proposition coming from Shure, who gave us the undisputed king of guitar microphones, the legendary SM57. And while it might seem a bit unfair to the Nexadyne, we will throughout this video compare it a little bit to the 57, simply because this has become such a standard for engineers and producers and guitarists all over the world for decades. In fact, the Nexadyne 5 is a bit of a different beast from the 57. It's a more premium microphone. It costs about 2 or 3 times as much. It has a different frequency response. It has a more complex, newer design with some features that weren't even available when the 57 came out. And it was designed supposedly for the stage, whereas the SM57 was designed for the studio. SM in SM57 actually means studio microphone, and it was originally intended for use with orchestras. Go figure. Not that any of that, of course, means anything if we look at how ubiquitous the SM57 has been for decades and decades, both in the studio and on stage. So before we give the Nexadyne 5 a listen, what are the main features of this new microphone? Well, first of all, its shape. It's designed to be actually hung in front of a guitar cabinet or amp, and this is certainly not the first microphone to do this, but I do appreciate the simplicity. Of course, you can also mount it to a regular mic stand. It's also a dynamic microphone, which means you can plug it in and use it without any need for phantom power, and dynamic microphones also tend to be sturdier than condenser microphones, which is an advantage on the stage but also in the studio, and they also are a bit less sensitive than condenser mics, which means you can crank them up a little more before you can hear those extraneous noises creeping in. As far as pattern goes, the Nexadyne 5 is a super cardioid microphone as opposed to the cardioid SM57. Super cardioid microphones tend to offer better side rejection and therefore give you better isolation, which is important especially on stage. Super cardioids are susceptible to picking up a bit of sound or noise from the back, but I find that to be a non-issue, especially in the studio. A potential downside of super cardioids is that they can be a little less forgiving when placing them, although for guitar amps it's a very simple thing, and also they can give a little bit more of a proximity effect, which means that the bass can become boomy when they're right on the grill. I'm going to actually put them right on the grill for this video and we'll check it out. The other big feature of the Nexadyne 5 is the new Rivonic Dual Engine, which is a big word that I didn't know what it meant, so I had to look it up, and it's a new mechanical system that helps the microphone reject unwanted noise, vibrations, handling noises, and so forth, therefore giving you supposedly a purer, more precise, and more clear signal. Shure goes as far as to say that because of this system, your tracks will need less EQ and signal processing, and that's a big claim, which I have to say I'm intrigued by. I know the most suspicious of you will think maybe that's just marketing talk, but certainly we'll keep an ear out as we test it. Of course, there's a lot more nerdy talk we could get into, and I'll post some of the specs here so you can have a look, such as frequency response, sensitivity, and so forth. But in my experience, all these numbers mean very little once you start putting microphones through their paces. So enough talk, let's put the mic up and see what it sounds like. For this test, I'll play a little bit through a very nice vibro champ for clean sounds. It's a tube amp. And then I'll step on a distortion pedal, first with a crunchy sound, and then more of a lead sound. I'll try to play a little bit of everything, and actually I will try to record it on a looper, so then I can just play the loop back and not only change the Nexadyne 5 to the 57, but also test the Nexadyne 5 in different positions. So hopefully this will give us the most consistent test possible. So let's do that, and I'll see you in a little bit, and we'll discuss it. So this first recording was done with the microphone between the center of the speaker and the cone, which is a very common place to put a microphone, and also it offers a bit of everything, the brightness of the center with the body of the cone, and it's a great spot if you want to test your microphones. We'll move it around later and also try with the 57, and I will talk in between, but if you want to hear all the takes in sequence without me yapping, then you can find that at the end of the video, and they will of course be indexed in chapters, so you can just jump ahead if you want to, or for later reference, and you can listen to them in sequence. So what did I think of this first test with this mic position? Well, I was quite impressed by the fullness of the lower mids and the bass of this microphone. Usually guitar players tend to filter out a lot of the bass, but because I do a lot of instrumental music, I sometimes have to record a guitar that will shine basically by itself. And then a microphone that can cover those lower registers in a nice full way, not muddiness, but actually a forward a lower frequency response, is actually very interesting. The highs I also found very present, but also sweet. So if you play a lot of leads and you go high up on the neck, that makes for a very interesting proposition. I also find the microphone quite defined, with every string clearly separated, which is very interesting, especially for clean sounds and, you know, very articulated runs. I find that very appealing. And when it comes to crunch and overdrive, it still retains the clarity. And I like that, because when I play leads, I find that it will represent the intricacies of the pick. And maybe it's lacking for distortion a little bit in the mids, but I'm not sure. I think it might be just because I'm so used to the 57 that I find this a bit jarring. But overall, I could use this microphone, probably from what I gathered from this brief test, for pretty much anything. So overall, I have to say I'm very happy with the sound of the Nexadyne 5, and if you told me I could only use this one microphone for studio or stage purposes, I think I could get away with it. And before we move on to comparing it to the 57, which is necessary of course, but also a bit unfair to make the Nexadyne 5 only stand in opposition to the 57, whereas I think it certainly deserves to stand on its own, I will run the same test again with the same loop into the same amp at the same levels, but now we'll move the microphone to the center of the speaker, dead center, and then out to the cone. These are very common positions, especially the center one, and variations on those are very, very common in recording studios and stages everywhere. Of course, as we move it towards the center, you'll notice a more bright, maybe brittle, maybe aggressive and edgy sound. And then when we move it to the cone, it will become mellower, maybe duller, but also rounder and warmer. Okay, those are very common places. Will it still sound good? To say, I find both of these extreme positions, so to speak, dead center and dead cone, to be absolutely usable, which is very nice to think that even if I only had this one microphone, I could still cover a full range of usable sounds. You can hear the nuances and ranges of the microphone come dramatically to the front as we move them. And again, if you want to hear them all in sequence without interruptions, you'll find them at the end of the video. Now, of course, you could play with more things, such as distance and off-axis and all kinds of stuff. And now let's hear the SM57. Oh yes, the good old 57. You can hear right away that peak in the mids, which maybe makes it sound a little muddier, whereas the Nexadyne was a little clearer, but somehow a little weaker maybe. So the 57 has a little less definition maybe, a bit less articulate. It's also a lot more nasal, especially when heard back to back. Nobody ever said that the SM57 is the best sounding microphone, but it certainly does work in a mix. It's still hard for me to not feel right at home with the 57, though sound-wise I think the Nexadyne 5 offers quite a few advantages. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking both of them together will work really well, with the Nexadyne providing those highs and lows and the SM57 filling those mids really nicely, and a blend of the two could provide a great sounding guitar recording. As the reliable and complete workhorse for both stages and studio, I think the SM57 is still safe in its top spot, just as its little brother the SM58 is for vocals. But for a more controlled, maybe more sophisticated or more complex setup, I think the Nexadyne 5 is absolutely a great proposition. Yes, it's more expensive, but these things will last you a lifetime or more, so that usually evens out through the years. I could certainly work with either of these or both of them together, as I suggested earlier, and be absolutely happy. And this is without even talking about post-processing or effects. And I have to say, Shure is kind of right, that more precise and narrow sound that this offers really does make it feel like it will need less effects, less EQ, less things to make it shine. And I have to say, well done to Shure. I was a bit skeptical, but I can see where that comes from. Now, the 57 still feels like home to me, and quality, strictly sound quality, I think this has maybe the edge. Again, I would feel hard-pressed to pick one over the other, and I'm lucky enough to be able to have both of them. So in the future, I might actually give you a glimpse of how both of these sound like together, but that requires a bit more testing, because when you start mixing microphones, there's phase problems, there's balances, and I really want to get that well prepared and well done before I share it with you. So would I recommend the Shure Nexadyne 5? I have to say yes, especially if you're not looking to have a bunch of microphones and you want to maybe get by with just one, and also if you're thinking of both using it as a studio and as a stage microphone, I would certainly do recommend you check this out. As always though, don't listen to some random guy on the internet. Go out, get the microphone, check it out, and try it out for yourself, and you'll make a much better decision. If you want to buy the microphone, I'll leave a link in the description below. And now let's get back to those sounds, all in sequence, without interruptions. See you soon.